All right, now let's go ahead and start styling some of the text that's in this page because it's not exactly the way that I would want it. I'm kind of envisioning more to do something like this, where like the H1's bigger, this is a little bit more justified looking. We've got different colors for the headings, and we've got like a rule underneath the heading level 2s and so forth, okay? So let's take a peek at how this looks, kind of, and then you'll also see down below that I don't have that blue and purple uh, link color. All right, so let's jump over here. And don't worry right now about the placement of this. This is fine for now. Okay, so right now what we've got is this black text. First of all, one of the things that we discussed is maybe for the heading levels, we don't want them to look exactly like this. Maybe we want them to be small caps, for instance. So one of the things that I can do is, instead of just making a rule that is specifically and only going to affect, just like the heading level 1, for instance, if I know that I want all of my headings to be in small caps, then I can make a new rule that's going to effectively apply that. So I can come over here to Element Style and click the plus button. And I'm not necessarily going to do it on the body, okay? I just happen to select the body. I'm going to void that out, and I'm going to make a grouped rule that is for H1, comma H2, and we're going to do basically all of the H levels down to H6. Okay, and you know what I'm also going to do? I'm going to add the aside as well, because I want the aside to also be in small caps. Okay, so I'm going to click down just below it, and the thing that I want to change, first of all, is I want to change the font variant. So font dash, and it starts type V, and I'm going to do font variant, and I'm not going to do ligatures, I'm going to just do variant, hit the colon key, and I'm going to tell it to do small caps, and then it automatically does an auto completion. And then you see that on the screen it's changing it for me right as I type it. Okay, so that's pretty nice. The other thing that I'm not in love with is automatically the user agent, if you want to scroll down and look, I would have to actually select it here. So but I'm not going to. But if you were to look at any of the H1, H2, or H3s, or, well, not necessarily the aside, but the H1s through 3s, you would notice that the user agent is also applying a bold to the font. And I don't want it to be bold. I want it to be normal. So I could do like this. I can say font weight, because it's the font weight that is either bold or normal or lighter or whatever. All right, so font weight, and I'm going to just type normal because I don't want that to be, I don't want it to be bold. And you see it's not bold anymore. If I were to, deselect that, you can see in live time what's happening to it, okay? I don't think that I really want mine to be bold. Now, the other thing about that, though, is that now that it's not bold, like, it looks a little bit too compressed in its smaller scale. And so I'm going to do another thing that I can add. It's called letter spacing. And it's going to add a little bit of space in between the letters to kind of track the letters or kern the letters. And so if I come over here, now this is going to be a very, very small amount, and it's going to be like 0.025 m, like that. If you start to add something like, 1, let's try that. I'm going to cut that and say 1, you see that it's like crazy big, right? Which actually could be kind of cool if like you were doing poetry, or if you're trying to, I don't know, do an eye chart, a reading chart, I guess. But I'm going to stick with something like 0.25 m. You can even see that 0.5 m, 0.05 is a lot. It's not so bad up here, but it doesn't look so good down here. It actually makes it a little bit harder to read, I think. So I'll do something like that, okay? Okay, now the other thing too is like this H1 looks really small. For me, I'd like for it to be a lot more dominant than that. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to add an element style, because nowhere in my actual style sheet do I have something that is specific to an H1. And I don't feel the need for H1, H2, H3, I don't really feel the need to do, here I'll show you. Let's go to the style sheet really fast. Actually, let's jump over to sources and let's look at the style sheet. I don't feel the need to do these kinds of descendant trees because really an H1 is an H1 on the page, an H2 is an H2 on the page. I don't have so many sections on this particular page that I need to identify specifically where they're supposed to be. If I had a sidebar, for instance, like if I had, you know, 2 columns and one was a sidebar and I was going to have a separate set of navigation or something over there, or add space, then I might actually do a descendant tree in my selectors, but I'm not going to do that for right now. So I'm going to jump back over to my inspector style sheet, and if you want to get the tooltips, you don't want to start typing stuff here. You want to go back to elements, and let's go ahead and I'm actually going to right click on my H1, inspect the element, and then it automatically selects it for me. So now whenever I click for a new element, it'll automatically create the H1 for me. So I'm going to start to type font size. That's the thing that is really a problem for me right now. And like I said before, I'm not using the shorthand font because if I only want to change 1 or 2 things about it, then I don't want to have to type out, you know, the font family and everything else, and you have to have that. And you have to put them in a certain order when you're using the font shorthand. It's probably the most persnickety and fussy of the shorthand rules that there are, or declarations that there are. So I'm just going to use longhand. So we'll say font size, and let's just see what 2M looks like. That's a little bit too big for me. So let's go back and let's do like, I don't know, like 1.85 and see how that looks. I think that might be a little bit better. Okay, so let's stick with 1.85M for my H1. Okay, and then let's find an H2 down here and we'll make a new rule. Let's go into the section ID content and look inside of an article. And if you look in the header, that's where the H2s are located. So if I right click, or if I just select that and then I go and I click the plus symbol for element style, now I can adjust my H2. And I want to change the font size for that. Let's take a look at it while we're doing it. Just be really explicit about setting the font size. Let's try a little bit smaller than H1. Let's try like 1.7M or something like that. I'm okay with that, I think. And then I also, for this one, I think I actually maybe do want this one to be bolder. I think I might like this one a little bit bolder. So I'll click down here and I'll say font weight. Oops, let's do weight, not size. So font weight, I am going to sort of buck the system on this one, and I'm going to say that that one should be bold. And the other thing is, I think that it's a little bit too bold, like in that black color. So let's try a different color. And what we can do is real quickly jump over to our palette, and let's just see what happens if we choose, for instance, like this dark color here. All right, so I'm going to copy this and jump back over here, and we'll just say color, and then I need my hexadecimal pound symbol, and then you see that it gives me that color. Okay, so let's try that. And then the other one that we could, the next one that we could do is, you know, I think I might want this a little bit separate from what's immediately below it. So I could put a rule underneath it, or an underline, and it's going to be a border. So we'll say border, and then bottom. Okay, and then let's see what it does at 1 pixel. And let's say that, let's just say for now we're going to use that exact same color, and we're going to, let's make this one dotted, for instance. Okay, and I think that that might be, those dots might be a little bit too small. I think that's a little bit too diminutive. And that might be a little bit better, but I think that's a little bit too heavy. I actually think that this is a situation where it might be kind of useful to have, instead of a hexadecimal number, to do the RGBA. So what we can do is jump back over to our palette, and right below the hexadecimal number, it shows you what the RGB numbers are. So we've got 167, 67, and 0. Okay, so 167670. I'm just going to copy that. Even though it has dashes, I'll show you what I'm going to do. So here, instead of that color, I'm going to type RGBA, and then I'm going to paste that. And Google Chrome's not going to know what to do with that. So we need to replace the dashes with commas, and then we need to add the fourth element, which is the alpha transparency. And let's do, I don't know, let's try something like 0.4. Let's see what happens, 0.4. And then that's a little bit better. It's like not quite so heavy. And I think that that might actually be a little bit better to use, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and move now to, let's move down to the H3s. We'll select that, and then we'll actually go over here and make a new rule. And then we need to set, well, if it'll let me click there, there we go. And we need to set the font size and be explicit about it, just like we did with the others. And then let's say that this one's like, I don't know, let's try 1.2 em. That's not too bad. Then this one, we may or may not want the font weight to be bold. Let's just see what it looks like regular. And then for the color, let's see if we can do that. Let's see, this A7 color. Let's see how it looks without being RGBA. Okay, so there it is there, and it's not too bad, not bold, because it becomes diminutive to this other one, which is exactly what it should be as an H3. The other thing too, though, is I think that the margin, it's sitting a little bit too close to that rule. So let's give it a top margin and bump that off. So we'll say margin, top, and let's make it like, I don't know, 0.5 em or something like that. And then it bumps it off a little bit, and it's a little bit easier to see the difference. If you liked it the way it was, then that's fine. The other thing, though, it does is that if you have an H2 that's not sitting right next to the rule, it bumps it off of whatever was preceding it. So that's actually kind of good. See, it's kind of close right there. So that's not too bad then if we've got it like that. And you've got another instance of it down here where you could see the difference. Oops, there we go. Okay, so that's probably a good margin bump. All right. And something I realize I'm really not in love with is this seems like super heavy in comparison to these things. So the longer I look at it, let's jump over to sources, and then I can see everything that I've done, you know, like right here. And I think what I'd like to do is see what happens if I take the RGBA, right? This RGBA, and instead of using the color of the hexadecimal number, let's also put RGBA here and see kind of what happens. And it's a little bit too pale, right? That's a little bit too pale. So let's see what happens if we go to like 0.9. That might be okay. But the other thing too that we could do is if we don't like the actual saturation of that, let's see what happens if we change this to 100% or put 1 in the alpha position. And let's see if we drop down the red a little bit. I think it might be a little bit too red. So instead of having 167 out of 255 levels of red, let's drop it down to maybe 147. And it starts to get a little bit darker, which I kind of like. And then maybe in the green section, we can drop that down a little bit too, and it gets a little darker as well. And I think I like that a little bit better where it's darker like that. And now that I've done that, maybe it's not a bad thing for my H3 that it becomes bold. So I could change the font weight here and copy that. And I can change it to bold. And, you know, I might be okay with that actually now that I've done that combination of things, okay? And so this is a good starting place. Now the other things that we still need to style, if you are unhappy, you could style the paragraphs with the margins, you could style lists. I definitely want to restyle the block quote, and I want to style a couple things at the definition list. And also in the footer with these links. But you know, I want you to try to do those things on your own. And in the next demo, I'm going to show you how you can move this to a different location.